You see the participants joining, just confirming. Bernadette, we're in our webinar ready to get rolling.
Yep, we're live.
Oh, great, great, great. Hello, everyone. It's 12:03, so we're going to kick it off and get started. Welcome to What's Next in Commercial Real Estate. We're going to do the 2025 market forecast. My name is Stephanie Coleman. I am the chapter president of the Connecticut Chapter of CCIM, and I'm excited to be here with Mike Goman of Goman in York. Let me introduce Mike and walk you through. I'll be quick so that we get Mike on right away. I'd like to talk about our annual sponsors. These programs aren't possible without our sponsors, and we appreciate them greatly. Northwest Community Bank, BL Companies, Community Investment Corporation, Cohn Resnick, Guilford Savings Bank, and H. Gulak and Sons. They sponsor our chapter and help us provide programs to the real estate community. There's always opportunity to become a sponsor for on either an annual basis or on an event by event basis. And feel free to reach out to Connecticut Chapter CCIM. If you're interested, you get some great stuff with sponsorship, free tickets to events. We showcase your business. You have an opportunity to present to the broader real estate community what your services are. So we'd love to have you on board. Our theme for the chapter is educating the future, and that is not just our focus on emerging professionals and young adults coming out of university into the real estate market, but it is also, the seasoned professional who is looking towards what is coming next and wants to strategize and set direction for the year ahead. So we provide education opportunities, events, networking opportunities so that the community can come together and help each other and learn and grow. For the first half, we have a pretty packed schedule. Of course, today we're doing our forecast webinar. In the February-March timeframe, we'll have Cohn Resnick give a tax update related to commercial real estate. I will host a CI 103. So if you're headed towards the PIN and you need a 103, which is all about user decisions, watch out for the dates and location for the March class. We'll do deals and drinks, which brings the community together in an informal environment to network, connect, share deals, maybe strike a deal. We will do our deal awards in April. We are working on a location for that currently. And then in May, we will do a introduction to commercial real estate course. This is great for folks who are thinking about entering the commercial real estate profession and just want a broad overview. And it has been especially successful for professionals who are in residential real estate today and are interested in crossing over into commercial real estate. And then we will close out the first half of the year with our mid-year symposium at TPC in Cromwell, Connecticut. And that is packed with a host of very experienced economists to give us a look at where we've come from in the first half of the year and how they predict we're going to close out the year. So without further ado, I am going to pass off the mic to Mike Goman. However, I just wanted to give you an overview of who Mike is. He has more than 40 years experience in commercial real estate. He advises municipalities, tenants, corporations, institutions, high net worth individuals throughout the commercial real estate lifecycle. He serves as president of AccuBranch LLC, and that company is a provider of real estate market research. He provides strategic network planning, branch programming for the local and regional banks. He's a licensed real estate broker in 5 states. And he is also a certified leasing specialist for ICSC, International Council of Shopping Centers. And he was also named as the 2021 Realtor of the Year by the Greater Hartford Association of Realtors. So very excited to have Mike with us. And we'll hand off the mic to him in 1 second. I'd like to give thanks to our Director of Admin and Operations, Bernadette Blaze, who in the background just makes all of these events and programs come together. So thank you, Bernadette. Mike, handing off to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen here. We got that?
You got it, can see it. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be with you once again. I think this is Stephanie, 3rd or 4th year that I've done this in January. I want to just add my thanks to Stephanie for that nice introduction, and of course to Bernadette for all her assistance and help as we kind of put this together for our session every January. Glad to be here with you again, as I said. And my screen is having trouble responding here. What did we just say, Stephanie?
So you're not advancing? You can, Bernadette can grab the screen if it's not.
You have the deck, Bernadette. See if we can.
Bernadette, do you want to try and upload Mike's presentation since it's not advancing on his end?
I don't know why I can't get it to advance. It seems.
Yep, hold on 1 second. Just let me get the file going.
Great, thank you.
It seemed to be working there for a minute ago when we tested it, so.
Like any spoiler alerts?
Yeah.
We have to hear the economic story unfold the way it's supposed to.
All right, can you give me control of that and we'll expand it?
It's in a PDF. So that's the best I can get it right now.
Wait, what? Let me log out and log back in. Sorry.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be starting momentarily as we work through a little bit of tech. Murphy's Law is in full force right now.
I think we're in business here.
Great, thank you, Mike.
I apologize for all that. Just, like I said, I've been on calls all morning. So thanks again to Stephanie and Bernadette for all their help. As Stephanie described, I've been in this business, commercial real estate, for more than 40 years, and across all aspects. I started out working for a a publicly traded commercial real estate company, and spent 12 years as CEO there, and then moved to a privately held company, spent another 12 plus years with them, and started GNY in 2008. I'm not going to go through all this, but worked basically across all sectors of commercial real estate. I'm now up to 6 licenses, brokers licenses. I think Stephanie said 5, but I added one, and I'm probably going to add another one next week as we expand our footprint across the U.S. Our clients, as I think Stephanie mentioned, are mostly municipalities, government, quasi-government institutions, lenders, and developers. Our work, we're a third-party analyst, if you will, or evaluator of projects. We don't do development for our own account. We feel like we have to have clean hands, so we focus just strictly on advising the clients that are showing on the top of that screen. And our work spans the things on this slide: the market and financial feasibility and fiscal impact studies, and then supporting economic development efforts. And we've done a lot of work in that area. Our focus is on what I describe as larger, more complicated commercial real estate projects. We are often developing RFPs and RFQs for our clients to attract development activity. And then we, once a selection has been made for a developer, we'll help with the development agreement process, which gets very complicated. And our goal there is to protect the interests of our client in these projects. Virtually everything we do, all the projects we've worked on the last number of years, virtually every single project has involved some level of public participation, tax increment financing, credit enhancement agreements, tax abatements, any number of things, waivers or reductions in building permit fees. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into the development discussion later on. But the important point is that, again, we're working on the larger, more complicated stuff, but every single one of them we've worked on for the last number of years has required some level of municipal or state participation. We often get pulled in on things when they go wrong. That seems to be more and more the case. We'll talk a little bit about that. We've worked on a lot of eminent domain proceedings. We're working on 2 of those right now. As you probably know, they occur either as a result of blight or obsolescence and abandonment of properties, or a property where the community is interested in taking the property for the purposes of economic development. And lastly, eminent domain is used if the municipality wants the property to build a new library or police station or whatever it might be. Again, in the world of troubled stuff, we get pulled in on contentious land use issues. And this is just a quick inventory, roughly a little over 250 assignments with municipalities and universities and not-for-profits and so on. And then, as Stephanie mentioned, we have a division called AccuBranch, which does exclusive work for banks and credit unions. We've done over 300 assignments for those. So let's jump in. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about the industry sector by sector, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of our predictions. Our group in-house, we're about 24 people in total, and we'll talk a little bit about the issues and predictions we have from our in-house group. And then we'll focus on Connecticut's position from a development activity and competitiveness standpoint. So no secret, if you've been in this business for the last 5 years, it's been a tough time with all of us facing a lot of headwinds. It started in January of 20 with COVID-19 and the dramatic ramping up of remote working. And then it was a series of body blows, really, to the industry, not the least of which is interest rates doubling during that time. Of course, office space and mall traffic really declined. We started to see inflation rear its ugly head and hit just as interest rates were doubling. And of course, in markets where you're in kind of a recessionary trough and things have gotten tough, lenders and investors tighten things up. They focus on the A properties or A projects in the A markets. So things get a little tighter. Just to make things worse, building materials started to see shortages and the costs of those went up. And as I said, we hit this recessionary trough. And then most recently, any election year, particularly federal election years, result in uncertainty. And people tend to kind of sit tight to see what the new administration's atmosphere is going to look like, and we saw a lot of that last year. Sector by sector, just briefly, office, central business districts currently struggling with historically high vacancy levels. The national vacancy numbers that are reported just around 21%. We haven't seen that kind of number, ever at that level on a national level. We've certainly seen it in the market, but not where sort of an average of the markets across the nation. Since the 90s, it's been about 12%. So by comparison, 21% is a big number. The Hartford region is running sort of 30 to over 50% in certain submarkets within Hartford. Terrible numbers, no question. And it's created a whole series of issues. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The default rate as reported by the Federal Reserve Bank on CRE loans and office is running, as of November's figures, a little over 10%. And to contrast that, I think it's important to understand that historically that number's been around 1% or less. So 10% is a huge increase in the number of office loan defaults. The National Bureau of Economic Research also publishes some data on what they call at-risk loans. So these aren't loans that are necessarily in default, but they are, as it describes, at risk. And they're saying it's roughly around 44%, which is, again, a historically high number. One thing we spend a lot of time looking at is the GSA, the General Services Administration. They're the largest landlord in the, or apartment, largest tenant in the nation, the federal government. They have been on a binge, so to speak, of reducing office utilization, office space for the last number of years, and have pulled about 100 million of square feet of office space out of their inventory over that time. But then COVID hit and everybody started working from home. So they're continuing down that path of evaluating their office needs. The latest numbers that they're throwing out for the industry are they're talking about an additional 30% reduction. So it's a big number, and it certainly hits certain markets and not others. But it's a big number, and we'll have to see how all that plays out. You saw the most recent in the last day or two, this return to work order that's been issued. Time will tell, whether that actually has a big impact on their plans. The reality is that people have gotten used to remote working. Labor agreements now reflect the right to work remotely. So I think it's kind of anybody's guess. We'll just have to let this thing play out a little bit. The other thing, though, that's had a serious impact on office is the age of these buildings. And again, this is a topic we're going to spend a little time with as we go along here. The reality is a lot of these buildings are now 40 and 50 years old. And, they weren't forever buildings. They never were forever buildings. They depreciate. And at some point, they need major capital expenses. It's not just about, new carpet and paint. It's about a lot of HVAC and core systems that have to be dealt with. So that's adding to this distress in office. Retail, sort of a mixed bag. Retail is really important to the overall economy. It tends to, consumer spending represents about 2/3 of the overall economic activity. 24 ended, with the holiday season in December versus 23. A little bit off the numbers from the previous year, but still up, roughly running the rate of inflation. The compound annual growth rate projected through the 2030 period is little over 3%. But again, the holiday season for 24 was down a little bit. 22, 23, you can see we're a little over 5%. 24 ended up a little under 4. E-commerce, we spent a lot of time talking about that, but it's really plateaued at around 16%. We think it'll continue to grow. It is part of the omni-channel presentation that we're seeing in retail, and has become really embedded in the consumer's mind. A malls, the A malls being Class A malls in Class A markets, they actually saw a real resurgence in traffic, and that's a good sign for that level of product. But out of the total number of A malls, the total number of malls in the country, the A malls represent only about 20% of the total, if that. So we're dealing with the B and C malls in A markets, and we're dealing with B and C malls in the B and C markets that are going to continue to be a drag on the retail real estate industry. On the other hand, non-mall retail, being strip center retail, has actually seen a huge surge in activity. So we're now looking at historically low vacancy rates, and the result of that is we're seeing investment capital flow back into that product in a big way, and we're seeing new development in open air, strip mall, non-mall retail, whatever you want to call it. And I think that'll continue. The consumer has expressed a strong preference for that type of product for a variety of reasons, and I think we're going to see that continue. We are seeing, certainly have seen this value orientation in retail resulting from inflation mostly. But recently, particularly December's holiday sales reflect it. We've seen a bit of a bifurcation based on income levels. So if you were to look at activity on income levels above 100,000 a year, the activity in retail has been not as strongly oriented towards value as the shoppers with less than $100,000 annual income. They're still very focused on value. So it's important to make that distinction, look at the market you're operating in and the type of project you're looking at. Inflation certainly took that toll on the consumer. They traded down, very, very clear. But, in doing this for as long as we've been doing it, we've learned not to underestimate the interest of the U.S. consumer in retail and shopping generally and buying goods of some kind. So we think that, this is a normal sort of reaction to the inflationary period that we're just kind of coming out of. And we'll see the U.S. consumer start to spend. We might see them de-emphasize the value proposition a little bit more in the next 24 months or so. The rate of retail store closures shot up again, no surprise, I guess, to anybody there as a result of the headwinds over the last few years. Food and beverage, being restaurants, hit hard. A little over 90,000 units closed. Still going on. I mean, we just saw the announcement that TGI Fridays is closing their store, their organization, all their stores. The impact was felt the most dramatically on the local and the casual dining. The older concept, casual dining, being TGI Fridays is a good example. They got hit very badly. The independents went into COVID with low levels of liquidity, and we've seen, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of good local restaurant operators as a result of that. There's continued downward pressure on pricing and value meals, and we're going to see that for the foreseeable future, we think. And things like staffing shortages and product cost, raw material cost increases have all impacted the restaurant sector. Apartments or single-family residential, really quite a story there. Continued increasing demand not apartments, we're into housing here, single-family homes. Increasing demand for that type of product, but a very tight supply. Prices have gone up. The level of the volume of transactions has stayed low. And we don't see that really starting to break yet. There are some early signs that it might, but this next 5 month or so period through the end of June will tell us whether that's got legs. Interest rates are continuing to dampen demand, but we dropped in here just for perspective what the current interest rates look like compared to the last extended period of time. I mean, if you go down that list, the average comes out to about 7%. We hit the low period of 2.65 in the early 20s. We got up as high as 7.8. Again, to put it into perspective, that's not anywhere near as high as we might have seen in past decades. And we ended last year in the high sixes. So I think it's important to put that into perspective from a historic standpoint. We think that we'll see the market come back and start to recover. It's been disrupted fairly badly by all of these headwinds that we've gone through, but we think it'll start to stabilize and we'll start to see the home buyer come back in a big way. Single family build for rent, sort of always been in the spectrum, but started to see a dramatic increase in certain southern markets. We think that'll continue. There was a time when single family build for rent was less than 20,000 units a year. We're now looking at 150 to 200,000 by 2028. Unfortunately, the data on this single family build for rent hasn't really caught up with the industry, and it's been difficult to find good data for that. Now let's talk about apartments. Record supply. 2024 saw over 500,000 new apartment units brought online. The market leaders were these three markets, New York metro area, Dallas, and Austin. we've never seen that kind of number historically before. The drivers are really the preference for this type of product. The job growth is occurring in the urban areas, and that's where the apartment project growth has occurred. The population growth has occurred in the same areas, and again, driving the apartment renter to these new products. Look, the reality of an apartment is it's cheaper now to rent than to own a house. But in addition to that, the research very clearly shows a strong preference for the mobility and the lack of maintenance obligation and the ability to get close to a city lifestyle of an apartment versus the more permanent fixed location of a home and the ongoing maintenance obligations and so on, and the suburban lifestyle. So, we think that's a good indicator of what's going to continue to drive the market with the post-boomer generations. Public policy, of course, also supports a lot of this kind of development, being that it focuses on density and it's aimed at generating central business district activity for restaurants and retail and so on. The tenants, we encounter this discussion with a lot of our municipal clients. There's still a feeling on the part of many of them that apartment renters are transients, lower income, they don't have a stake in the community, all these sort of negative ideas. And in fact, when you look at who is renting these modern new products that have been brought online at record numbers, it's the double income, no kids. It's the young couple, young professional couple. Maybe they're working at Pratt and Whitney and they're both engineers. They're earning over $100,000 a year each. They want that mobility. They want to be able to lock the door and take off and go camping or whatever it is. And they can afford, a high rent. The single income, no kids, that category is kind of an interesting category. That tends to be a lot of recently divorced people, and again, mostly women who are renting apartments for a variety of reasons. They similar to the double income, but they like the added value of the security of an apartment project and the amenities of things like gymnasiums and workout facilities and saunas and yoga studios and so on. The list of amenities in a lot of these projects seems to be endless. And then there's two categories of empty nesters. There's working empty nesters and fully retired empty nesters. And same sort of drivers. They like the mobility. They like the ability to walk away from it and lock the door. They don't want to cut lawns or plow snow anymore or shovel snow anymore. And they have the income to pay the rents that these, modern, ultra amenitized modern projects offer. It is pretty market specific, and we are seeing some development of these products cooling off a little bit. There are a few of the southern markets that have cooled off. They got a little bit overbuilt. And then markets with very either slow population growth or no population growth and no job growth, there is a limit to how many of these you can add into a given market without starting to see vacancy rates creep up. So we are seeing rents and rent growth moderating a little bit market by market. Interest rates, they increase the cost to the developer in building these, but they also increase the cost of buying a home. So they have this impact on driving renter demand because people find the cost of buying a home has gone up, but it's also driving the cost of these projects up higher as well. One area that we're spending a lot of time looking at is the increases in OpEx. And if you look at the data, operating expense cost increases in the last few years have outpaced the increases in revenue. And that's a problem. That is the math is pretty simple. It just means diminishing returns off the investment, and that's not sustainable. So, the management of these buildings is going to become critical. The ability to raise revenue, raise rents in different markets is already critical to try to keep up and keep, sustain the returns. Property taxes, local property taxes on these new products have become a big focus for our work when we're doing financial feasibility. We're seeing property taxes easily consume 3 or 4 months of annual rent. And to some degree, if it gets high enough, it's going to just get to the point where it's not sustainable. So stay tuned on that. But we spend a lot of time looking at that, and it's one of the drivers for what I mentioned earlier, in the sense that the every project we've looked at, and not just apartments, but certainly focused on apartments. Every apartment project we've worked on has required some level of public participation, typically in the form of a tax abatement, and they can take any structure, take the form of any structure you can imagine. Moving on, just in general on housing, no surprise to anybody on this call that there's this national focus on housing affordability. And but what we would point out is that there are roughly 83 million millennials who are now sort of aging out, if you will, of the apartment living, and are looking at home buying as an option in the next number of years. So we're doing some work in terms of projecting what that's going to look like and how that might impact the overall market. Can you backfill with subsequent generations if you've got a project? But the one thing you learn when you do this kind of work is there is always a return to historic norms. And there are certain things, remote working is one of them, that are going to disrupt things on a permanent basis. But by and large, if you look at behavior patterns over decades, you very quickly see that there's not a big difference from one generation to the next. And we're seeing interest in home ownership and home ownership rates sustain the same levels as they've historically been. So we'll just have to keep watching that. Self-storage, not a lot to talk about there. Slowed down a little bit, but very much focused on these better designed, higher quality facilities. Warehouse and logistics, everybody saw the surge driven mostly by Amazon and e-commerce generally. We think that there's going to be a significant deceleration in new building. It may be the deceleration we're thinking of. It may be short-lived though, driven by ongoing growth in e-commerce, and yet that story is yet to be told. We generally say that for every additional $1 billion in e-commerce sales, that requires about 1 million square feet of additional warehouse logistics facilities. So that seems to be a common theme that we've seen across all the data. Currently, we're seeing nationwide about 6%, a little over 6% vacancy in that product. That's gone up a little bit. But like everything else that we're talking about today, there are markets that are up and markets that are down. Cost increases and interest rates continue to be an issue for that product, just like they are in every other sector. So let's talk about what we see going on as we move forward in this year. This is sort of the soft landing, the proverbial soft landing. We think that we'll see interest rates decrease somewhere in 25, probably later 25. 6 months ago, we were predicting that a half point to 75 basis points, maybe even 100 basis points was possible. We're not doing that. We're thinking it's probably going to be in the order of 25 to 50 basis points, and we think it'll come later in the year. There is ongoing economic uncertainty, both at the political level and at the international level. And, in the international perspective, think of everything from China to Ukraine to the Middle East and so on. Inflation, the Labor Department numbers are 2.9%. So we're still not reaching that Fed target. We're still above that. So we still have some inflation. Recently we've seen gas prices and a couple of other things start to go back up again as a result of international issues mostly. We like a CPI indicator called the Common Man CPI, which looks at a different grouping of goods, and we think maybe better reflects what again the common man is faced with in terms of inflation. And it typically outpaces the labor department numbers. And it is again, year over year, showing 3.3 versus that 2.9%. Prices, last 4 years, if you look at the last 4 years in that overall period, prices are up about 21% and wages are up about 16%. So, that's not a good indicator. That gap between the growth in prices and the growth in wages is really at an all-time high. We haven't seen that in many, many years. Deflation is occurring in discretionary items, and that tends to be luxury items, if you will. But where the core inflation is happening, this common man inflation, is in the essential terms, everything from the price of eggs to the price of gas and so on. So stay tuned on that. We haven't defeated inflation yet at all. The growth in Sunbelt markets is going to continue. The risk premium associated with weather events and a variety of other things still is there and maybe is getting more attention now with some of the things that have gone on with coastline properties. Headwinds that we expect, remote working, definitely it's with us. It's here to stay. And the technology that supports it is just going to continue to get better. And the last point on that is that, the reality is people like it. So remote working is here to stay, and that's going to cause this ongoing adjustment in everything. From the easy one is office occupancy, but you also have to think about traffic patterns. What's the going to work side of the traffic flow in a remote working environment? What's the going home side of the traffic flow? We use that sort of analysis for a variety of reasons, but those traffic patterns, if you look at Placer AI data or any of the other providers, you can see the change in those traffic patterns, and it's changing how commercial real estate users, banks, restaurants, whatever it might be, it's changing how they look at site selection. Commercial real estate values, we're still in a period of price discovery. We still have a bid-ask gap between what people think their property is worth and what the market is willing to pay for it. There is some cost volatility. It has stabilized somewhat, but now we're trying to figure out what this movement towards tariffs is going to mean on the cost of construction materials. And again, stay tuned on that. We don't know. Debt and equity, it's gotten better from an availability standpoint, but we're still faced with high interest rates. If you're looking for opportunities, and this is what we get called in on a lot of times, the focus is very much on markets with population growth and job growth. Redevelopment conversions, a lot of talk about what you can do with some of these buildings. We're going to spend a few minutes on that here shortly. And a lot of ideas around what you can turn an office building or a mall into, and lots of different opportunities. So the financing environment and, what we do in our world is really driven by the cost of capital. It's gotten better. We're seeing stability in it. We have the possibility of some reduction. Net rental income is stable. In some situations, some products and some markets, it's declining mostly because of increased expenses. Appraised values, I wouldn't want to be an appraiser, a commercial real estate appraiser in this market that we're in. The market uncertainty is so difficult and creating such discrepancies that it's very difficult, I think, for an appraiser to come in and give you a really solid market value number on a given asset. Some are easier than others, but certainly office and large malls fall into that category of what's it worth. The lenders and investors, we talked about that earlier, about the focus on the A markets and the A properties. There is an increased interest in suburban. There is less interest in the urban, the CBD property, because of the market uncertainty that we've been facing. Defaults and foreclosures, as we mentioned earlier, are definitely up. But we are seeing the pretend and extend starting to end. In other words, owners of properties are starting to accept what their properties are worth in the market. And, we're seeing some institutional investors come in and say, look, we we have to unload this property and redeploy that capital into something else. The story's not going to get better because we're sitting still. So we are seeing that pretend and extend come to an end. So that's driving an activity increase in the sales world. This willingness to recognize losses and look for alternatives. On older assets, the cap rates are going to continue to rise, and that's just I think that's self-evident. Predictions in retail, we're going to see more freestanding retail. We talked about that. The stores are really now billboards or showrooms. We used to call it bricks to clicks, that stores drove activity to websites, but really it's become clicks to bricks. The retailers now are using their website to drive and social media to drive traffic into their stores. When we talked in this session last year, we talked about the importance of buy online, pick up in store, and curbside pickup and delivery. You can now go to your, Home Depot website and take advantage of any of these forms of delivery. And they all have really ramped up their systems, and they've become quite effective. And a lot of the traditional brick and mortar retailers have really embraced these delivery models and are doing quite well with them. Specialty retail, high-end apparel and shoes and so on, other than in the A malls and the A markets, we're going to continue to see really flat growth. There is, as we've talked about in the last couple of sessions that we've done, much more of a focus around this experiential component of retail, make the store more interesting. It's not just about browsing the aisles, but providing a much more interesting store environment. And of course, the value component to retail continues to be to sort of underlie the consumer's behavioral patterns in a big way. Food and beverage, quick service restaurants, fast food, lots of changes, lots of new prototypes. Casual dining, interesting what we're seeing in casual dining. It really got hit hard during COVID, but it has come back in a couple of areas, and we've been calling it bespoke food and beverage concepts. So these are regional operators, and one example we talked to just recently, this group, experienced chefs and experienced restaurant operators. They have 29 restaurants, 5 different brands across 3 different states. They're not trying to be a chain. They don't want to be the next Applebee's or Lone Star Steaks. They want to have their own identity, and the president mentioned to me that there is a limit to how many of any one store they want to have, any one restaurant they want to have, because they feel that they want to avoid the look of becoming a chain restaurant. We're also seeing the blending of food and entertainment. You've heard me talk in past sessions about the importance of arts and entertainment and food and beverage, and putting those together can be a winning formula for the right group. The easy example of what that looks like is a Dave & Buster's. But the interesting story about this stuff is CEC Entertainment, which, believe it or not, is actually Chuck E. Cheese. Now, most of us would have written off Chuck E. Cheese as a chain and said, are those guys even still around? And they weren't really. They were in big trouble, big financial trouble, but they hired a new CEO, a guy that came from Six Flags. They have done $350 million in renovations. They now have 560 locations across 18 countries. And the performance of these stores is really recovered. Now, they don't look like a Chuck E. Cheese of the 10 years ago. They have trampolines, they have video games, they have all kinds of things in them. They're quite interesting, quite well done. And I think we're going to see more of that type of food and beverage concept that really blends in entertainment. So something to watch. Things on our watch list, the obvious ones: office, large malls, older hotels, and older apartment products. For the reasons we've talked about. Depreciation is real. 40-year-old properties don't get better, and they require substantial capital investment to allow them to continue to be productive. Regulatory attention on multifamily. A lot of discussion around what's called junk fees, a fee for whatever it might be. allowing a guest to have access to the workout facility, that sort of thing. There's a long list of those, and we've seen that, and I think we're going to see a lot more attention. There's currently a lawsuit against one of the largest national apartment owners over that issue. There is a similar lawsuit against large national landlords of apartments on rent setting using a couple of the different websites. And of course, that leads to discussion about should a state implement rental controls, and rent controls are just a bad idea for everybody, the market or the consumer. But I think we are watching this because we think it's a politically attractive discussion, and I think we're going to see more about it. The tax assessments, we talked about the importance of property taxes in terms of controlling operating expenses in apartment projects. With respect to our municipal clients, things that they should be watching are their values. You can't just assume that commercial real estate is going to be in lockstep with the past decades where the values just keep going up every year like clockwork. They just don't anymore. Watch those older assets and be proactive. Don't wait until the owner calls you to talk about the problems. Project feasibility on our watch list, of course, as I mentioned at the top of the discussion, one of the things we do is help our clients assess the more complicated projects. So this market research component is critical, and making sure that the planned project really aligns with the market demands. The supportable and comprehensive financial projections, we've got to be comfortable when we look at the financial projections that the hard and soft costs and the timelines, and cap rate assumptions are believable. The obvious red flag is when there's someone's buying a property at a certain cap rate, so the going in cap is at one level, and then they're showing an exit in the 10th or 11th year at a much lower cap rate. I mean, that's a red flag. Maybe possible, but we really want to understand how the investor thinks they're going to get there. And our mantra here with a lot of audiences that we speak to about the industry are, look, developers don't do this because they like the idea of building things. They're doing it as a way to invest capital. Therefore, the test, and the only test that really matters, is that the project has to make good financial sense. Anything else ends up being nice looking pictures of an architect's rendering that sits on a shelf. It's got to make financial sense. And we spend a lot of time with our municipal clients explaining that to them because they don't view real estate development that way. And yet that's what drives real estate developers and lenders and investors. Other things on our watch list on projects is the experience of the sponsor or the development teams. And we see a lot of projects that just aren't well thought out, $100 million projects that should cost 80 million. We don't like it when we don't get transparency out of the sponsors, or we see, the things I mentioned earlier, just kind of overly optimistic projections or too much design, too much emphasis on design. So Connecticut opportunities. We did a study a few years ago on capacity. We're still roughly maybe half of that capacity. So there's still considerable capacity available for these upscale amenity-rich projects in the Connecticut markets. There is also a very high need for market rate affordable, and there are a number of state programs. The Department of Housing is doing a good job with their financing and incentive programs. So we still think we'll see a lot of activity in those two areas, the upscale, higher end product and the market rate affordable project. And there's generally community support if the location is right. And as I said earlier, I've said a couple of times, local incentives are available in most cases or in many cases. The focus of the activity will continue to be on markets where there's job growth, New London, Fairfield, New Haven markets, the counties, and markets where there is replacement potential. In other words, you've got a lot of older product that doesn't have amenities, old kitchens, old bathrooms, an old decor package, and and yet you've got good household and disposable income numbers. So there's opportunity in those markets to bring online a newer, amenity-rich, nicer designed product and literally move people. Because again, you're in a market with little or no job or population growth, so you're really moving things around. Good locations are still available across Connecticut, and we think that'll continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. There are opportunities in office and retail. If you have the appetite for it, there are opportunities that result from market or functional obsolescence in some of these office and retail products. The real focus going forward, though, is in those areas I've mentioned, arts and entertainment and food and beverage. The value proposition is pretty good. The Connecticut markets are good, as I've said, good disposable income, good household income, stable markets, very stable markets. And now you can look at locations in some of these older buildings that are available at historically low prices. So what we think we'll see in both office and retail is people looking at it and saying, well, I can move from a C location in a suburban town. If I'm a small law firm, for example, I can move from a C location in a suburban town to an A location right in the center of Hartford that maybe became available from the downsizing of one of the major law firms. So I think, the typical of what happens in a market that's going through this supply upheaval, if you will. So the ability to upgrade to a better location at a historically low price is a real opportunity for existing businesses, and it also represents a lot of opportunity for startups and entrepreneurs to, again, get better real estate at lower prices. And I think the goal, if you're the owner of one of these buildings or the manager, is to really tell Connecticut's story about these things that I've been talking about, the stable markets, strong incomes, good demographics, and really work to attract some of the newer concepts that are being rolled out in the major markets around the U.S., attract them to your building in Connecticut. Retail, the opportunities, are again, we've talked a little bit about omni-channel. The reality is that shoppers, still prefer physical stores. And interestingly enough, even the recent generations that have grown up with smartphones and shopping online, and they are now shopping for themselves. The parents aren't doing the shopping anymore. They've moved up from an age standpoint and a stage of life standpoint, and they are now shopping for themselves. And this new generation of shoppers actually finds that they like the store experience, and that's driving a lot of activity. And maybe it was predictable, but it's interesting to see it actually happen. The keys in retail, however, are a little different than they were in the past. The convenience component, people aren't willing to go to a major regional mall, park, 15 spaces out from the entrance to the mall, negotiate the parking lot in bad weather, and then walk through the mall proper to find their store, which is several hundred yards down the mall. What they want is the convenience of driving up to a strip center location, parking where they can literally walk across the parking lot and into the store. 1/4 of the distance, something like that. Just that convenience, and get what they want, and get back to their car quickly. The in-store experience is critical. Dick's Sporting Goods is probably the best example of how they've kind of embraced that and really improved their in-store experience. And of course, value is the theme that we see, carrying along through everything that we see going on out there. And again, if you're the owner of a retail property, don't look around Connecticut and, well, let me rephrase that. Look around Connecticut, but also include a review of what's going on in some of these other markets, whether it's Nashville or Atlanta or some of the Florida markets up and down the East Coast. Those markets, there's a lot of new activity, new concepts. Look at some of these high growth markets of the South and make some trips there and see what you can find in the way of new concepts, and see if you can encourage them to open stores in your center in Connecticut. Food and beverage, same story. great locations, historically low prices, opportunity to upgrade for both existing as well as startups and entrepreneurs. Get out there again, look at these new concepts as I described a minute ago. We have great average household income and good disposable income, quite a bit higher, as you can see on this chart, than the U.S. average. So we have good numbers. We've got a good story to tell. I don't think we do the best job we can in terms of selling that story. I'm always amazed when I sit down with owners in New England at how we tend to focus on just what's going on in New England. And we think that there is an opportunity that we can bring from some of these other markets. And I think we've got to move away from that and really expand our reach. And I think there's opportunity in that. Industrial opportunity, like we're seeing around the country, in what's called small bay industrial. There's no hard definition of that. I've seen it defined as upwards of 100,000 square foot buildings. The spaces tend to be 3,000 to 5,000 feet. We've looked at a number of new buildings or new projects rather that are being proposed. Some of them are 7 or 8 building facilities. Each building's maybe 25,000 square foot, and they're split up into 3,000 to 5,000 foot locations. Last mile is still a factor, although we think that's slowing down a little bit. Amazon opened over 1,000 facilities in that last mile, and that's what they use as a small bay industrial. Data centers we're reading a lot about. We've done a fair bit of work in the data centers. I'd be very careful about that one. We hear data centers being discussed as new construction and also an opportunity for conversion. One of the analysts at JP Morgan, a guy that we follow quite a bit, he did some calculations and he said back in December that if all of the CapEx money and all the investment money being targeted to go into data centers actually resulted in the construction of all those data centers, there would be enough data center space available to accommodate roughly 12,000 chat GPT systems. So I think it's and his analogy, and I think it's a good one. His analogy was it's sort of like what happened with fiber optic cable in the early 2000s when Corning sold $4 billion worth of fiber optic cable, and fiber optic cable got laid across the country. And there's a ton of that fiber optic cable that's still sitting underground, never been used. And the danger with data centers is the similar kind of bubble. So we want to be very careful as we talk about data centers, either for new development or as an option for conversion. Battery storage, tough thing to get approved, but we are seeing them. And I think there's still opportunity for that. There's definitely opportunity for warehouse and logistics, ongoing opportunity for warehouse and logistics. We're perfectly positioned in a lot of ways to be a great location for that type of operation. And the characters of these the character of these kinds of facilities is obvious. You need a labor pool, you need access to highways and airports and rail and so on. And they tend to want to go where there's similar uses, partly because of the labor pool. So conversions, big focus on that in Connecticut. What do we do? And we're going to talk about that in a minute here with these older buildings. But what we like to point out on malls, and this came up recently with, of course, the announcement we probably saw over the potential or pending sale of the shops at Buckland Hills. I mean, this is great real estate. These are great locations. They're flat. They're fully approved. They're largely impervious coverage. They have access and visibility to high traffic volumes. They're surrounded by other activity, economic activity, and they're also surrounded by a strong market, so in terms of rooftops. So these are great real estate locations. And, with the kind of state and local support for the redevelopment, we think there's a lot of opportunity to redevelop these into what we call mixed-use villages. And again, when you look at what these things are selling for, Crystal Mall sold for around 9.2 million, I think, down at Waterford. And it was at one point valued for 150 million, sold for 9.2 million. So there's a real opportunity to buy these great locations at very low prices from a historic perspective. Other conversions, office and office campuses, same sort of thing, mixed-use villages. Some of these office campuses, the buildings are really not going to be buildings that can be converted to anything else. They're not designed for that. But if they can be acquired at the right price And if state and local support is present, they can be converted into other productive uses. Again, they're generally pretty good real estate, well-located real estate, and therefore good opportunities. Older hotels, the oldest and the toughest, can be converted to residential in some cases. There is a supply-demand gap in some of the Connecticut markets between older properties and the demand for newer sort of modern properties. So we think we're going to see more activity in the coming 2-year period in hotel construction. We'll see more of that activity will occur down along the shoreline, we think. So other options for retail and office other than mixed-use villages, you've read about all this, whether it's warehouse or self-storage or data centers. But the reality is, in a lot of these cases, these things are either obsolete from either a functional standpoint or a market standpoint. So there may not be a solution for the building that's there today. These are often purpose-built buildings. They had a real specific economic life, and they weren't intended to be a forever building. So the right answer is face up to it and demolish it and get the site back into the market. Again, they're usually good locations. So the comment we make is often that it's not that we're overbuilt, it's that we're under demolished. The reality is some of this stuff has to come down and become something else. That's this, what do we do with all these old buildings? This is probably the question we get from clients, municipal clients, more than any other question. The reality is that in Connecticut, most of the commercial real estate is over 40 years old, and we're seeing the vacancy issues that we've been talking about. And this issue is sort of an epidemic and needs more focus from both the state and the municipalities. And fortunately, we're starting to see that. Now, this isn't a Connecticut phenomenon. I mean, you can go to Scranton, Pennsylvania, or Des Moines, or Dallas, or San Francisco, and you can see the same issue of these aging buildings, these 40-year plus commercial real estate buildings. At some point, they're worth little more than the steel structure and the concrete deck. And everything else in it has to be removed and replaced in order to make them workable buildings. The search for solutions, and we're spending a lot of time with this, looking at other markets, not just in the US, but other markets around the world as to what they're doing to incentivize the turnover of these buildings and get them into the hands of somebody who's prepared to reinvest in them. The big barriers are whether there's enough demand. Are there regulatory barriers that stand in the way of doing this or drive the cost up of converting one of these older buildings? That fire code and building code issues, they can be a huge issue in terms of driving the cost of conversion up dramatically. And of course, as we've talked about, these things have to make financial sense. So the ideas that we see discussed around the markets are, are there ways to ease the regulatory burden specific to these old buildings? And what are the various incentive programs that can be used to make these things make financial sense? And that it's not just about property taxes. It might be foregoing capital gains tax on a sale. It might be reducing or eliminating the cost of permits, all kinds of ideas, and all good ideas. And we have to continue the attention on this issue because it's not going to go away until we come up with a way to make these things financially viable. So the upside of the foreclosure stuff that we see going on in either major office buildings or major regional malls, again, as I've described, is that you can buy these great locations at substantial discounts. With a lower basis, you can offer lower rents, whether that's a mall or an older apartment or older office. And what that means is that these better locations are now available historically low rents. And all this may enable more development of affordable housing, and it may open up opportunities for small businesses and startups and entrepreneurs. So there is an upside to all this. The downside is this loss of property tax revenue and the temporary, hopefully, diminution of indirect economic activity that results when a building empties out over time. But again, the better locations available at lower rents is an important part of the market turnover, the free enterprise system where things fail and get replaced by other ideas. So the lower demand for these older properties, less well located, will go down as people, as I described earlier, find they can move from a C to an A class location for the same kind of rents or similar rents. And that lower demand drives down the rents. It all flows downhill in that older product. And of course, that drives down the value and drives down the amount of taxes. So this is a classic supply versus demand analysis in a market that's been severely disrupted. And we will all benefit by having good conversations about it and by drawing the municipalities where these buildings sit into the discussions. So expectations going forward, we actually think this year, next year are going to be record years. The projections for rental housing units still run around, that historically high number over the next years out to 2028. So somewhere around 500,000 new units in the rental housing market. Capital's coming back into the market. A lot of investment capital sat on the shelf in that 5-year period of headwinds that I described earlier. And that uncertainty that we saw on the part of investors is now being replaced by what we call the fear of missing out. They don't want to be standing on the sidelines when capital starts coming back into the market and picking up some of these opportunities and taking advantage of the things like the development of rental housing units and strip center retail. So there's been a fair bit of dry powder, so-called dry powder. Pension funds that normally would have allocated 5 to 10% of the money coming in from people's pension contributions, and who sort of parked it or put it on the sidelines when there didn't appear to be good opportunities in CRE. That money is now coming back in. So, capital feeds our business, and if the taps start to open up a little more, that's going to result in opportunity for both new and redevelopment projects. And of course, we've got all these redevelopment opportunities that are available. We're also seeing this emerging demand for new products and services. So there's a lot of new opportunity in this new environment. Inflation's still a factor. Interest rates, as I said earlier, we think will go down. Construction costs have improved, stabilized. Material and equipment has become available again, and we have capital looking for deals. All good things. We still see a housing shortage in Connecticut. That's been going on for about 15 years. Home prices here in Connecticut remain high and the supply is low, and that's driving rental demand. Rent payments continue to be cheaper versus the home mortgage, but we'll see that balance out as we start to return to historic norms, particularly if interest rates come down a little bit. Construction starts are down from 2022, and that means that deliveries in 2026 will be lower. There is more interest in these value add opportunities. As interest rates come down, cap rates will come down. Getting the election behind us has been good. Consumer sentiment shows improvement, and the consumer sentiment around the future of the economy is showing improvement. So all those things are good things. The way investors look at the market, one of the problems we have is this low population growth. You can see from this table, the U.S. population from 80 to 2024 grew by 50%, and Connecticut grew by 18. That's a flag, for investors. Median age in Connecticut was in the 1960s was 28, but in the 2020s is 41. So we're getting older as a community. Now, you can make the argument that 41 that age group is actually prime spending years. Those are the people that can afford to upgrade houses and are spending more time on a variety of things, more time and more money on a variety of things. The one thing we have strongly in our favor is our stable markets with good household income, average household income, and a high disposable income. The high barriers to entry create strong rents. There is a lot of redevelopment and repurposing opportunities in some of these obsolete properties that we've talked about. The competition is lower than in the high growth markets. A Dallas investor, active developer we've talked to recently said, if he's doing a project in the Dallas market, and he does apartments, he said if he's doing a project in the Dallas market, he's got 10 or 15 other guys also doing projects. If he comes to Connecticut, he might have one other guy doing a competitive project. So he likes that. It lowers the risk profile. And we can offer good locations in our good markets. They have to be supported by the market research we've talked about, and of course, liquidity and this robust financial plan. But if we can do all that, we'll get our share of the increased activity. So in summary, we may not be one of the southern high growth markets, but we still have tremendous opportunities for real estate investment. Let me pause there. And we have some questions in our chat, I think. I'll go to that. Stephanie, did you want to go through any of the questions here?
Sure. I think there's some good dialogue around taxes and expenses around real estate, including insurance. I mean, I personally am seeing just a homeowners or property owners insurance crisis, in Connecticut, in coastal areas. And wondering, Mike, what you're seeing, because not only are insurance rates rising, but insurance companies are scrutinizing even more closely before they insure or bind. And in some cases, they're canceling outright, and leaving homeowners and property owners in the lurch altogether.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, insurance is clearly a factor in some of the southern markets like Florida and New Orleans and so on. Any shoreline properties, the Oceanside collapse of the condo in Oceanside. Florida has tightened up their regs around capex analysis and engineering analysis on older condo projects. I don't think it's become such an issue in Connecticut, but it could easily get there if we end up with some major storm. So I think it's, as you point out, Stephanie, the shoreline, if you have investments on the shoreline properties, it's worth thinking about what you might be able to do to harden those properties so they can withstand storms. That's our big risk in Connecticut shoreline. There's a question here about remote working, whether it's reversing. Sure, we've seen the occupancy levels come back up in some markets, but even if it reaches, let's say, for example, it reaches 80% of historic norms, that 20% that is remote working is still a big impact on the office sector. So I don't think you can say, we'll get back to the historic norms that we saw in the 2010s, for example, pre-COVID. So we have to plan on dealing with this increased office vacancy, just the reality of it. So it won't return to historic norms. Question on appraisal technique, whether or not we've seen movement towards the range of value, depending on the buyer type. We've seen a lot of discussion on that, but we haven't seen appraisals really focusing on that. They've provided it sometimes as a narrative, but typically the lenders aren't going to accept a range of value. They want a market value. Climate resilience, there's a question about commercial real estate stakeholders thinking about climate resilience. And again, I think that's driven by the market, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out this year. But definitely there is a emerging crisis, if you will, on the availability and cost of insurance coverage for commercial real estate properties in any of these areas that are prone to some sort of weather-related or climate-related problem. Now, we used to say that was really a shoreline kind of problem, but it's not anymore. I mean, you can look at almost any market across the country, and you might have been able to say a few years ago that the central U.S. Parts of it were immune to that sort of thing, but I mean, then you look at these catastrophic tornadoes that have moved across the center of the U.S. So I don't think there is a market you can really point to that is uh, not exposed to some level of climate risk. And I think the insurance companies are catching up with that, and that's going to have an impact on it. The other thing that's going to have an impact on commercial real estate insurance, I think, is the fact that many of these insurance companies are faced with huge losses, and they've got to make up those losses by spreading premium increases across the entire insured platform that they have. So that's going to drive rates up. We have a question on asking our legislators to work on helping commercial real estate. Boy, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, as an industry, we don't advocate for ourselves the way that we should. The way as investors and people with a lot of money at risk in our products. And if you talk to the average state legislator, I mean, they'll tune you out faster than anything. They see us as quote unquote real estate developers. Nobody likes a real estate developer. Nobody likes a landlord. And we've got to work hard as an industry to change that perception. I mean, virtually all of the real estate developers and owners that I've worked with in 40 plus years are people who are genuinely interested in being able to provide a good product at a fair price to their tenants. And we contribute an enormous amount of property taxes to the communities that we are in, and we support schools and police forces and all kinds of things. About virtually 95% of your tax payments as a commercial property owner is a net gain to a municipality versus a homeowner's tax payments to that same municipality. There have been estimates over the years that say for every dollar paid by a homeowner in property taxes, that home costs about $1.05. So it's a net loss. The commercial is, as I said a minute ago, a huge net gain. That is a message that needs to get out there more. We need to be better advocates for our industry. Rent controls is a question here. Look, I think we could do a session on rent controls, but anytime, and this is going to sound perhaps overly cynical, but anytime the government thinks it can do a better job of establishing supply and demand and pricing in a market, it usually doesn't end well. I don't understand why there would be a belief that somehow the government can make better decisions about that than owners and investors. Are there owners and investors who may be willing to overcharge for things? Sure. That happens. But as I said a minute ago, I think the vast majority of commercial real estate owners are interested in delivering a good product at a fair price. And the rent control on them is the market. I mean, the market does a very good job. It may not be as rapid, but neither is government controls. Market reactions sometimes take a little bit of time, but it'll in balance, it'll do a better job than a federal government board or commission that doesn't have their money at stake will be able to do. So taxes and insurance are keeping single family home buyers on the sidelines. I agree with that. Taxes are more than my mortgage. Yeah, I know we've seen a lot of that. Where does how do we close this gap in the housing shortage? My argument, and we're seeing more of it, my argument would be that towns really need to take a hard look at their regulatory environment. The barriers to investment are two things, right? They're either regulatory or they're financial. If in Connecticut, you can pretty much count on being able to make the financial side work, cost of development versus sale price or available rents, and the only barrier is the cost of complying with regulation or the regulation preventing you from getting a project underway. I mean, then we should focus on this regulatory environment. And that sort of ties back to my comment a minute ago that we just haven't done enough work advocating for our industry with our legislators. And I think we just got to get better at that. And again, we could spend a lot of time talking about that. But if you get the opportunity to talk to your local Board of Selectmen member or a council member or your state legislator, talk up the cost of compliance with regulatory issues and the cost of property taxes. And, again, we have to do a better job on that. We're out of time. We're 1:30. So I think we've covered most of the questions. Stephanie or Bernadette,
Thank you so much. I know I took copious notes. This recording will be available to those of you who are registered here. And correct me if I'm wrong, Bernadette, we will circulate the presentation as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are burning questions, other questions, email them to what's our email address? admin@ctccim.com.
Yep, I'll drop it in the chat.
Yeah, and we'll see if we can get you some insights, because I think there were some other good questions, especially around real estate, the new administration as it relates to real estate. We're really curious to see, tariffs or materials aside, what kind of environment, we might see over the next several years. Thank you all for joining. Look forward to seeing you at one of the events, and looking forward to a great 2025. Everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you so much.
thank you.